Hi, my name's Colleen Garcia, and 6 months ago, my sister Maria held a memorial service for me while I was very much alive, sitting in a Starbucks 3 miles away, scrolling through Facebook and watching strangers cry over my supposed death. She collected my life insurance, cashed my disability checks, and even set up a GoFundMe for my funeral expenses, while I was banned from my own bank accounts because the system said I was deceased. They say blood is thicker than water, but apparently it's not thicker than greed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all started, Phoenix was already pushing 90 degrees by 8 a.m., and I was running late for my shift at Meridian Insurance. I'd been working there for 3 years as a claims processor, which meant I spent my days investigating suspicious insurance claims and fraud cases. The irony wasn't lost on me later. I was rushing around my small apartment in Tempe, trying to find my other work shoe, when my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Emergency at Banner Desert. Mom collapsed. Come now. My heart stopped. Our mother Carmen had been battling diabetes for years, and every family emergency felt like it could be the last one. I didn't even think to call back or ask questions. I just grabbed my keys, threw on whatever clothes were clean, and drove the 20 minutes to the hospital with my hazard lights on, praying I wasn't too late. The emergency room at Banner Desert was chaos as usual. Families clustered in waiting areas, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. I found Maria pacing near the information desk, her long black hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing scrubs from her job as a medical assistant at a clinic across town. When she saw me, she rushed over with tears streaming down her face. "Colleen, oh my God, I'm so glad you're here," she sobbed, throwing her arms around me. "It happened so fast. She was making breakfast and just collapsed. David had to call the ambulance." David Thompson was Maria's boyfriend of 2 years, a guy in his 30s who worked construction when he could find it and spent the rest of his time playing poker at the casino. I'd never liked him much. Something about the way he looked at people like he was calculating their worth, but Maria was head over heels, so I kept my opinions to myself. "Where is she? Can we see her?" I asked, scanning the busy hallway for any sign of our mother. "They're running tests," Maria said, wiping her nose with a tissue. "The doctor said it could be hours before we know anything." Her blood sugar was completely out of control. We spent the next 4 hours in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, drinking terrible coffee and watching daytime television with the sound turned down. Maria kept getting up to pace or go outside for air. She seemed more agitated than usual, checking her phone constantly, but I attributed it to stress. Our family had never been good at handling medical emergencies. Around noon, a young doctor with kind eyes and tired shoulders approached us. "Garcia family?" We both stood up immediately. "That's us," I said. "I'm Colleen. This is my sister Maria. How is our mother?" "She's stable now," he said, and we both exhaled in relief. "We've got her blood sugar regulated, but we want to keep her for observation for a couple days. She can have visitors, but only immediate family, and we ask that you keep visits short." "Of course," Maria said quickly, "whatever she needs." "Can we see her now?" I asked. The doctor nodded. "Room 314, but please, no more than 2 visitors at a time, and she needs rest." Maria grabbed my arm as we headed toward the elevators. "Actually, Colleen, would you mind if I go up first? Alone?" She was asking for me specifically when the paramedics brought her in, and I think she might be embarrassed about the whole thing. You know how she gets. I did know how Carmen got. She hated being seen as weak or vulnerable, especially in front of me. Ever since our father Roberto had died in a car accident when I was 22, she'd leaned on Maria more than me. Maybe it was because Maria worked in healthcare. Or maybe it was because I'd always been the more independent one, the one who moved out first and called less often. Either way, I was used to being second choice when it came to family emergencies. Sure, I said. I'll wait down here. Tell her I love her. Of course I will. Maria hugged me again, tighter this time. Thank you for being so understanding. You're the best sister anyone could ask for. Looking back now, that hug felt different. It lasted too long, and when she pulled away, her eyes were red but not from crying. There was something else there. Something that looked almost like guilt. But in the moment, I just thought she was overwhelmed. I spent another hour in the waiting room, checking work emails and texting my supervisor that I wouldn't be back that day. When Maria finally came back down, she looked calmer but exhausted. How is she? I asked. Better. Tired, but better. She said to tell you she loves you too, and not to worry. You know, Mom, always trying to take care of everyone else even when she's the one in the hospital bed. Should I go up and see her? Maria shook her head. She's sleeping now. The doctor gave her something for the pain, and she was already dozing off when I left. Maybe tomorrow would be better? I wanted to argue, wanted to insist on seeing my mother with my own eyes, but Maria worked in healthcare. She understood these things better than I did, and honestly, I was exhausted too. The adrenaline crash was hitting me hard, and I had a splitting headache from the fluorescent lights and terrible coffee. Okay, I said, but call me if anything changes. Promise me. I promise, Maria said, and she hugged me one more time before we walked to our cars. The next morning, I called the hospital to check on Carmen's condition and to find out visiting hours. The woman at the front desk was polite but confused. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm sorry. What was the name again? Garcia. Carmen Garcia. She was admitted yesterday to room 314. There was a long pause, the sound of typing, then more silence. Ma'am, I don't show any patient by that name currently admitted to our facility. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I was there yesterday. My sister and I spoke with the doctor. Room 314. More typing. Let me check our discharge records. Yes, here it is. Carmen Garcia was discharged early this morning at 6 a.m. Shows here she was released to family. Released to family? Which family member? I'm sorry, I can't give out that information over the phone. You'd need to speak with someone in person. I hung up and immediately called Maria. It went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times with the same result, then sent a text asking where Mom was and why I hadn't been told about the discharge. No response. By lunchtime, I was worried enough to drive to Maria's apartment in Scottsdale. She lived in one of those sprawling complexes with identical buildings and palm trees planted in perfect rows. I'd been there dozens of times for family dinners and birthday parties, but something felt different as I walked up to her door. The blinds were closed, and her car wasn't in its usual spot. I knocked and waited. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and called her name. Nothing. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who lived in the unit next door, poked her head out. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair always perfectly curled and a tendency to keep track of everyone's business in the complex. She's not there, mija, Mrs. Rodriguez said in accented English. Left early this morning with boxes and suitcases. That boyfriend of hers, too. Boxes? Like they were moving? Looked like it to me. Big truck, lots of stuff. Seemed like they were in a hurry. My blood went cold. Did you see my mother with them? Older woman, about this tall gray hair? Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. No, just the 2 of them. But they were making a lot of noise, loading things up before the sun came up. Woke me from my sleep. I thanked her and walked back to my car on unsteady legs. Something was very wrong. Maria wouldn't just disappear without telling me, especially not with our mother just getting out of the hospital. And why would they be moving? Maria had lived in that apartment for over a year, and as far as I knew, she was happy there. I drove to the clinic where Maria worked, a small family practice on the other side of Phoenix. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with bright pink nails, looked up when I walked in. "I'm looking for Maria Garcia," I said. "She works here as a medical assistant." The woman's expression shifted from professional courtesy to confusion. "Maria? Honey, Maria quit 2 weeks ago. Didn't even give notice. Just called one morning and said she wouldn't be coming back." The ground felt like it was shifting under my feet. 2 weeks ago? Are you sure? Positive. Left us in a real bind, to be honest. Dr. Martinez was not happy about it. I drove home in a daze, trying to piece together what was happening. Maria had lied about still working at the clinic. She'd disappeared with David and all her belongings. Our mother was supposedly discharged from the hospital, but I had no idea where she was. Nothing made sense. That evening, I tried calling every hospital in the Phoenix area, asking about Carmen Garcia. No one had any record of her being a patient. I called her apartment, her few friends, even her neighbor across the hall. No one had seen or heard from her. By the third day, I was frantic enough to file a missing person report. The police officer, who took my statement, was sympathetic but not particularly helpful. "Family disputes are complicated," Officer Martinez said, not looking up from his paperwork. "Sometimes people need space from each other. Has your sister ever done anything like this before?" "No, never. We're close. We talk almost every day, and our mother is diabetic. She needs her medication, her regular checkups. This isn't like either of them." "I'll put it in the system," he said. "But unless there's evidence of foul play, there's not much we can do. Adults have the right to go where they want, even if family doesn't like it." I left the police station feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Whatever was happening, I was going to have to figure it out myself. The first real clue came a week later when I tried to access my bank account and was told the account had been frozen. Not closed, frozen. The bank manager, a stern woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging around her neck, looked at me like I was trying to pull some kind of scam. "Ma'am, according to our records, you're deceased." I stared at her. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your account shows a death certificate was filed with us 6 days ago. All accounts are automatically frozen when we receive that documentation." "But I'm sitting right here. I'm obviously not dead." She adjusted her glasses and looked at me more carefully. "Do you have identification?" I handed over my driver's license. She studied it, then typed something into her computer, frowning. "This is very unusual," she said. "I'm going to need to call our fraud department." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small office with a fraud investigator named Mr. Peterson, a bald man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely puzzled by my situation. "Someone filed a death certificate with the state of Arizona 6 days ago," he explained, showing me a copy on his computer screen. "Says you died of complications from diabetes at Banner Desert Medical Center." I read the document over his shoulder, my hands shaking. There was my name, my date of birth, my social security number. But the date of death was listed as the day after I'd gone to the hospital looking for my mother. "This is fraud," I said. "Someone forged this." "It appears that way," Mr. Peterson agreed. "The question is, who had access to your personal information and why they would do something like this?" I thought about Maria working as a medical assistant, how she would have access to medical forms and official paperwork. I thought about how she'd insisted I not go up to see our mother, how she'd been checking her phone constantly, how agitated she'd seemed. "I think my sister did this," I said quietly. Mr. Peterson leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? She's missing. Disappeared the day after this death certificate was supposedly filed. And I can't find my mother either." "I'm going to need you to file a police report about the identity theft," he said. "And we'll need to start the process of proving you're alive, which sounds ridiculous, but it's actually more complicated than you'd think. Over the next few weeks, I learned just how complicated it was to prove you're alive when the system says you're dead. My Social Security benefits were suspended. My health insurance was canceled. My credit cards were frozen. I couldn't work because my employment eligibility couldn't be verified. I was essentially erased from existence while walking around very much alive. But the worst part was the silence. Maria's phone was disconnected. Her email bounced back. Her social media accounts were deactivated. It was like she'd vanished from the earth, taking our mother with her. I was surviving on savings and the kindness of my friend Ashley Chen, who let me crash on her couch when I couldn't pay rent on my apartment. Ashley was a software engineer, one of those people who could find anyone online if she put her mind to it. She spent hours helping me search for any trace of Maria or David. "This is really sophisticated," Ashley said one evening, looking at her laptop screen. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The death certificate looks completely legitimate, filed through proper channels. Your sister would have needed access to official forms and someone on the inside to make this work." "She worked at a medical clinic," I said. "She would know how these things work." "It's more than that, though. Look at this." Ashley turned her laptop toward me. "Someone's been collecting your Social Security survivor benefits." Survivor? Benefits? When someone dies, their family members can collect benefits from Social Security. Your sister applied for survivor benefits the day after the death certificate was filed, claiming she was your dependent. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed made me sick to my stomach. Maria hadn't just faked my death for fun. She'd done it for money. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Ashley did some quick calculations. "Probably around $3,000 a month, plus whatever life insurance policies you had." "Do you have life insurance through work?" I did. A $50,000 policy through Meridian Insurance, the company where I worked investigating insurance fraud. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Maria's gambling problem, which she'd tried to hide, but I'd noticed anyway. The way she always seemed stressed about money despite having a decent job. How David was always talking about get-rich-quick schemes and investment opportunities. I thought about how she'd hugged me so tightly at the hospital, how her eyes had looked guilty instead of just sad. My sister had killed me on paper to pay her debts. The next morning, I called Meridian Insurance and asked to speak with someone about my life insurance policy. The claims department transferred me to a supervisor named Janet Rodriguez, who sounded confused when I explained my situation. "Ma'am, we processed a claim on your policy last week. The beneficiary provided all the proper documentation, including a death certificate and funeral home receipts." Who was the beneficiary? According to our records, Maria Garcia, listed as your sister and primary beneficiary. How much was the payout? $50,000. The check was issued 4 days ago. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Maria had not only stolen my identity and my Social Security benefits, she'd also collected $50,000 by convincing my own employer that I was dead. "I need to report this as fraud," I said. "I'm very much alive." There was a long pause. "Ma'am, if this is some kind of prank..." "It's not a prank. Someone forged my death certificate and has been collecting benefits in my name. I'm filing a police report today." Janet Rodriguez's tone became much more serious. "In that case, I'm going to need to transfer you to our fraud investigation unit immediately." By the end of that phone call, I had opened fraud cases with my life insurance company, Social Security, the state of Arizona, and the FBI. The federal agents were particularly interested because faking death certificates and collecting Social Security benefits across state lines was a federal crime. Agent Sarah Williams was assigned to my case, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude I imagined you needed to investigate white-collar crime. We met at a coffee shop near my friend Ashley's apartment, and she listened to my story while taking notes in a small leather notebook. "This is more common than you'd think," Agent Williams said when I finished. "Family members have access to personal information that makes identity theft easier. The fact that your sister worked in healthcare gave her even more advantages. Have you been able to find her?" "We're working on it. The good news is that it's hard to disappear completely when you're spending stolen money. People leave digital footprints when they use credit cards, rent apartments, even buy groceries. We'll find her." "What about my mother? I still don't know where she is or if she's okay." Agent Williams flipped through her notes. "We checked with Banner Desert Medical Center. Your mother was never a patient there. The emergency room visit you described never happened." The coffee shop suddenly felt too cold. "What do you mean it never happened?" "There's no record of Carmen Garcia being admitted or treated at that hospital on the date in question. No ambulance call to her address, no admission paperwork, nothing." I stared at Agent Williams, trying to process what she was telling me. But I was there. I spent hours in the waiting room. I talked to a doctor. "You talked to someone wearing scrubs who claimed to be a doctor. But I suspect your sister and her boyfriend staged the whole thing to get you to the hospital, where your sister could gather the information she needed to fake your death certificate." The room was spinning. Maria had orchestrated an elaborate performance to trick me into going to a hospital where she could somehow use my presence to create false documentation of my death. The crying, the panic, the concerned sister act, it had all been fake. "Where's my mother?" I asked quietly. "We're still working on that. But Colleen, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your mother might be involved in this scheme." I shook my head immediately. "No, my mother would never do something like this. People do desperate things when they're in financial trouble. And according to our investigation, your mother had significant medical debt that was sent to collections last year." Agent Williams was wrong about my mother. She had to be. Carmen Garcia might be stubborn and sometimes difficult, but she wasn't a criminal. She would never help one daughter steal from another. There had to be another explanation. But as the days passed and turned into weeks, doubt began creeping in. Why hadn't my mother tried to contact me? If she was innocent in all this, wouldn't she be worried about me? Wouldn't she be looking for me the same way I was looking for her? 6 weeks after Maria had disappeared with my identity and my life, Ashley made a discovery that changed everything. "I found them," she said, bursting into the living room where I was watching daytime television and trying not to think about how my entire existence had been stolen by my own family. "Where?" "Las Vegas. Maria's been posting on a new Instagram account under the name Marie Thompson. She's using David's last name, but it's definitely her. Look." Ashley showed me her phone. There was Maria, tanned and smiling, standing in front of the Bellagio fountains. Her hair was shorter and blonde now, but it was unmistakably my sister. The caption read, "Living my best life in Vegas. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need when you need it most. Blessed. New beginnings. Grateful." I scrolled through the other photos. Maria and David at expensive restaurants. Maria shopping on the Strip. Maria getting a massage at some fancy spa. All funded with money stolen from my death. "There's more," Ashley said, pulling up another social media account. "David's been posting too, but he's not as careful about privacy settings. Look at this." David's Facebook page was a parade of casino photos, expensive hotel rooms, and screenshots of winning poker hands. But what caught my attention was a photo from 2 weeks ago. David and Maria standing with an older woman whose face was turned away from the camera. The caption read, "Family dinner with the best mother-in-law a guy could ask for." The woman in the photo was wearing a blue cardigan that I recognized. I'd bought it for my mother last Christmas. "That's my mom," I whispered. "Are you sure?" I was sure. Not just because of the cardigan, but because of the way the woman was standing, slightly hunched to the left because of an old back injury. The way her hair was styled in the same practical bob she'd worn for years. The silver bracelet on her wrist that had belonged to my grandmother. My mother was alive and well and living it up in Las Vegas with the daughter who had faked my death. Agent Williams was very interested in the social media discovery. Within a week, she had tracked down the hotel where Maria and David were staying and confirmed that Carmen Garcia was with them, registered under the name Carmen Thompson. "We're coordinating with Las Vegas Metro Police to make arrests," Agent Williams told me over the phone. "But here's where it gets interesting. Your mother filed for Social Security survivor benefits too, claiming you were supporting her financially." "She what?" "She's been collecting benefits as your dependent survivor. Between her, your sister, and the life insurance payout, they've stolen almost $90,000 in 2 months." I had to sit down. My mother, the woman who had raised me to believe that honesty and hard work were the most important values in life, had been collecting Social Security benefits based on my fake death. "There's something else," Agent Williams continued. "We found records of them planning a memorial service." "A what?" "A memorial service. For you. This weekend at St. Michael's Community Center in Phoenix. Your sister has been telling people that they're finally ready to properly celebrate your life, and she's invited pretty much everyone you've ever known." I felt like I might throw up. Maria was going to hold a fake funeral for me while spending the money she'd stolen by faking my death. She was going to stand up in front of our friends and family and cry crocodile tears about losing her beloved sister. "We're going to arrest them when they come back to Phoenix for the service," Agent Williams said. "But I have an idea that might be even better." "What kind of idea?" "What if you showed up to your own memorial service?" The plan was simple in concept but required perfect timing. Agent Williams and the Phoenix police would be positioned around St. Michael's Community Center, waiting for Maria, David, and my mother to arrive. I would wait until Maria had started speaking, until she was in front of everyone, spinning her lies about grieving and loss. And then I would walk in. The legal team assured me that this wouldn't interfere with their arrest or prosecution. If anything, it would provide additional evidence of the fraud, since Maria would be caught red-handed collecting sympathy and potentially donations based on a lie. But for me, it wasn't about the legal case. It was about the truth. Saturday. Afternoon. I sat in Ashley's car in the parking lot of St. Michael's Community Center, watching people I'd known my whole life walk inside carrying flowers and sympathy cards. My former co-workers from Meridian Insurance. High school friends I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors from my apartment complex. Even my old college roommate had driven down from Flagstaff. They all thought they were there to honor my memory. Instead, they were about to become witnesses to the biggest betrayal of my life. Through Ashley's car window, I watched my co-worker Janet from the insurance office walk into the community center carrying a potted plant. Behind her, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson hobbled along with her walker, clutching a sympathy card. These people had taken time out of their Saturday to mourn someone who was sitting 50 feet away, very much alive and increasingly angry. Agent Williams had positioned herself near the entrance, pretending to be just another mourner. She caught my eye through the windshield and tapped her watch. It was almost time. "You sure you're ready for this?" Ashley asked, squeezing my hand. "Once you walk through those doors, there's no going back." I nodded, though my stomach was churning. I need to see this through. These people deserve to know the truth. The community center was one of those bland, multi-purpose buildings you find in every suburb, with beige walls and industrial carpeting that had seen better days. I'd attended a few quinceañeras and baby showers here over the years, but never imagined I'd be attending my own memorial service. Ashley drove around to the back entrance where we'd arranged to meet Officer Martinez. He was waiting by the service door, dressed in plain clothes but with the unmistakable posture of law enforcement. "They arrived about 20 minutes ago," he told me quietly. Your sister, the boyfriend, and an older woman matching your mother's description. There's quite a crowd in there, maybe 60 or 70 people. 60 or 70 people who thought I was dead. 60 or 70 people who had probably brought sympathy cards and flowers, who had cleared their Saturday schedules to pay their respects to my memory. The magnitude of Maria's deception was staggering. "Has the service started yet?" I asked. "Just beginning. Your sister is up at the podium now, welcoming everyone. We've got audio surveillance running, so we're recording everything she says." Officer Martinez handed me a small communication device. "When you're ready to make your entrance, just press this button. We'll make sure the doors are clear and that our people are in position." I clipped the device to my jacket and took a deep breath. Through the thin walls of the community center, I could hear the murmur of voices, the scraping of chairs, the general sounds of a gathering crowd. Somewhere in there, Maria was probably dabbing her eyes with tissues and accepting condolences from people who genuinely cared about me. "Give me 5 more minutes," I said. "I want to hear what she's saying." Officer Martinez nodded and spoke quietly into his radio. Within moments, I could hear Maria's voice through a small speaker he carried. "Thank you all so much for being here today," Maria was saying, her voice thick with fake emotion. Colleen would be so touched to know how many lives she impacted. She was always the strong one in our family, the responsible one who looked out for everyone else. I almost laughed at the irony. The responsible one who looked out for everyone else was currently being mourned by the very people she'd tried to protect throughout her life. "Losing her so suddenly has been devastating for our family," Maria continued. "One day she was fine, and the next day she was gone. The doctors said her diabetes had progressed much faster than anyone realized." The diabetes story was a nice touch, I had to admit. It explained why I might have died suddenly and young, and it tied into our mother's real medical condition, making the lie easier to maintain. Maria had clearly thought this through carefully. "But I know Colleen wouldn't want us to be sad today," Maria went on. "She'd want us to celebrate the time we had with her and remember all the ways she made our lives better." Through the speaker, I could hear sniffling and the rustle of tissues. People were actually crying for me. Real tears for a fake death orchestrated by someone they trusted. "I'd like to invite anyone who has a memory they'd like to share to come up and speak," Maria said. "Colleen touched so many lives, and I know she'd love to hear your stories." This was too much. I pressed the button on my communication device. "I'm going in," I whispered to Officer Martinez. He spoke into his radio again, then nodded to me. "All units are in position. Good luck." Ashley hugged me tight. "You've got this. Just remember, you're the one telling the truth here." I walked to the back entrance of the community center, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone inside would be able to hear it. The door was heavy and creaked slightly when I opened it, but the sound was masked by someone at the front of the room sharing a story about how I'd helped them file an insurance claim after a car accident. The back of the room was dimly lit, and I was able to slip inside without anyone noticing. I positioned myself behind a pillar where I could see the front of the room but remain hidden from most of the crowd. There was Maria, standing at a small podium decorated with white flowers. She was wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, probably bought with my stolen life insurance money. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she had just enough makeup to look appropriately grief-stricken but still beautiful. She nodded sympathetically as my former coworker Tom finished his story about how I'd helped him understand his health insurance benefits. "Thank you, Tom," Maria said softly. "That's exactly the kind of person Colleen was, always helping others, even when she was struggling with her own health issues." More nods from the crowd, more tissues being passed around. I scanned the room and saw faces I recognized everywhere. My high school friend Rachel, who had apparently driven 2 hours from Tucson. My former supervisor Linda, who had never particularly liked me but was here anyway out of professional courtesy. Even my landlord Mr. Peterson, who was probably already planning to rent out my apartment. And there, in the front row, was my mother. Carmen Garcia sat in a folding chair, wearing the blue cardigan I'd seen in David's Facebook photo. Her hair was freshly styled, and she was holding a white handkerchief, though her eyes looked dry. David sat next to her, wearing an ill-fitting black suit and the kind of uncomfortable expression men get when they're forced to attend emotional events. My mother wasn't just complicit in this scheme. She was sitting in the front row at my fake funeral, playing the role of the grieving mother. "I'd like to read something that Colleen wrote," Maria said, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I found this in her apartment when we were cleaning out her things." She unfolded the paper with shaking hands, though I suspected the trembling was for show. She wrote, "I know I haven't always been the easiest person to love. I'm stubborn and independent, and I don't always know how to ask for help when I need it. But I want my family to know that they mean everything to me. Maria, you've been not just my sister, but my best friend. Mom, thank you for teaching me to be strong. I hope I've made you proud." The words were beautiful and heartfelt, and they might have moved me to tears if I had actually written them. But I'd never written anything like that in my life. Maria had crafted a fake final message to manipulate people's emotions at my fake funeral. "She did make us proud," my mother said from the front row, speaking for the first time. "Every single day." The audience murmured in agreement. Several people were openly crying now. Linda from my office was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Rachel had her arm around another friend I didn't recognize. Maria folded the fake letter and placed it carefully on the podium. "I know this is difficult for everyone, but I'm so grateful you're here. Colleen didn't have life insurance or much in savings, so this has been a financial hardship for our family on top of the emotional loss." Here it comes, I thought. The money grab. "If anyone would like to contribute to help with funeral expenses or to support our mother during this difficult time, we've set up a fund," Maria continued. "Every dollar helps, and I know Colleen would be touched by your generosity." I watched in horror as people began reaching for their purses and wallets. My death was not only a source of grief for these good people, it was costing them money. Money that would go directly into Maria's pocket. "We've also created a memory book where you can write down your favorite stories about Colleen," Maria said, gesturing to a table near the entrance. "David will be collecting those along with any donations." David stood up and nodded to the crowd with what he probably thought was an appropriately solemn expression. He positioned himself by the memory book table where he could intercept both written memories and cash donations. This was my moment. Everyone was looking toward the front of the room, focused on Maria's performance. I stepped out from behind the pillar and began walking slowly down the center aisle. It took a few seconds for people to notice me. The first was Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, who squinted in my direction and then grabbed the arm of the woman sitting next to her. "Isn't that—" she started to say, then stopped. The whispers began spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. People turned to look at me, then looked back at the front of the room where Maria was still, talking about funeral expenses, then looked back at me again. "Oh my God," someone said. "Is that Colleen? But she's supposed to be—" Maria was still talking, oblivious to the commotion behind her. "The doctors said there was nothing anyone could have done. Her condition deteriorated so quickly that even the best medical care couldn't—" "Maria," my mother interrupted sharply. Maria looked at her, confused. "Mom, what's wrong?" My mother was staring directly at me, her face white as the flowers on the podium. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Maria followed her gaze and turned around. For a moment, the entire room was perfectly silent. Maria stared at me like she was seeing a ghost, which in a way, she was. Her carefully composed expression cracked, and for just an instant I saw pure panic in her eyes. "Colleen?" she whispered. "Hello, Maria," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silent room. Sorry, I'm late to my own funeral. The community center erupted. People jumped to their feet, talking over each other, some laughing, some crying, some just staring in shock. Rachel screamed my name and started pushing through the crowd to reach me. Tom from work was recording everything on his phone. Mr. Peterson looked like he was having a heart attack. But I kept my eyes on Maria, who was still frozen at the podium, holding the fake letter she'd claimed I wrote. Surprised to see me? I asked, walking closer to the front of the room. I have to say, this is quite a turnout. I'm touched that so many people cared enough to come to my memorial service. Colleen, I can explain, Maria started, but her voice was shaking so badly she could barely get the words out. Can you? Because I'd love to hear the explanation for how you filed a death certificate for someone who's standing right in front of you. The crowd was pressing closer now. Everyone. Trying to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the front of the room, I could see Agent Williams near the back, speaking quietly into her radio. Officer Martinez was moving toward David, who was looking around desperately like a trapped animal. How could you do this? Rachel shouted from somewhere in the crowd. How could you let us all think she was dead? Everyone please calm down, Maria said, trying to regain control of the situation. There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I interrupted. You filed a fraudulent death certificate. You collected my life insurance money. You've been cashing Social Security checks in my name. What part of that is a misunderstanding? My mother finally found her voice. Colleen, Mija, you don't understand what happened. Don't I? I turned to face her. Explain it to me, Mom. Explain how you've been living in Las Vegas for the past 2 months, collecting survivor benefits based on my supposed death, while I've been sleeping on a friend's couch because all my accounts were frozen. The room was getting chaotic now. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, pulling out their phones to record what was happening. David had abandoned his post by the memory book table and was edging toward a side exit, but Officer Martinez was already there, blocking his path. You faked your own death, David suddenly shouted, pointing at me. You're trying to frame us for something you did yourself. It was a desperate lie, but a few people in the crowd looked confused. If I was really dead, how was I standing here? If Maria was innocent, why did she look like she wanted to crawl under the podium? I have evidence, I said loudly, addressing the whole room. Bank records, Social Security documents, even audio recordings of my sister and her boyfriend planning this fraud. Agent Williams chose that moment to step forward, flashing her FBI badge. FBI, everyone please remain calm. We're executing arrests in connection with a federal fraud investigation. The community center went dead silent again. People slowly backed away as more law enforcement officers appeared from various exits. David raised his hands without being asked. My mother started crying, but these were real tears, not the fake ones she'd been preparing to shed at my funeral. Maria Garcia, you're under arrest for identity theft, fraud, and filing false federal documents, Agent Williams announced, approaching the podium with handcuffs. This is insane, Maria said, but she wasn't protesting her innocence anymore. She was looking around the room at all the faces staring back at her, people who had trusted her, people who had come to mourn me based on her lies. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Williams continued, securing the handcuffs around Maria's wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they led my sister away, she looked back at me one last time. There was no apology in her eyes, no remorse, just anger that she'd been caught. David and my mother were arrested next, though my mother's charges would be lesser since she'd been more of an accomplice than a mastermind. David kept protesting his innocence, claiming he didn't know the death certificate was fake, but the evidence of his social media spending spree would make that defense hard to maintain. After the arrests, the community center slowly began to empty. People approached me in small groups, some hugging me, some asking questions, some just staring like they couldn't quite believe I was real. "I can't believe she did this to you," Linda from work said, shaking her head. "Your own sister." "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, holding my hands like she was afraid I might disappear again. "Where have you been living? Do you need anything?" The outpouring of genuine concern and care from these people was overwhelming. They had been prepared to mourn me, and instead, they were celebrating my resurrection. But underneath their relief and joy, I could see the questions forming. How does something like this happen? How well do we really know the people closest to us? Tom from work approached hesitantly. "Colleen, I'm so sorry. When Maria told us you'd died, I never thought to question it. We should have known something was wrong." "How could you have known?" I asked. "She had official documents. She was my sister. You had no reason to doubt her." But even as I said it, I could see the guilt in his eyes. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he'd been fooled. We all want to believe we'd see through a lie this big. But the truth is that the people closest to us are often the best positioned to deceive us. Officer Martinez approached me as the crowd thinned out. "We're going to need you to come to the station and give a formal statement. There are also some federal agents who want to interview you about the financial fraud." I nodded. The legal process was just beginning, and it would probably take months to untangle all the damage Maria had done. Getting my identity restored, my accounts unfrozen, my credit repaired, all of it would take time and patience and paperwork. But standing in that community center, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Ashley appeared at my side, having waited patiently through all the chaos. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Home. I didn't actually have a home anymore, since my apartment had been rented to someone else after my supposed death. But Ashley's couch had become home over the past few weeks, and the word had never sounded better. As we walked toward the exit, I picked up the memory book that David had abandoned when he tried to run. Page after page of people sharing stories about me, talking about how I'd helped them or made them laugh or been there when they needed someone. Maria had created this book as a prop for her performance, but reading through it, I realized it had become something real. These people hadn't just come to my memorial service out of obligation. They'd come because I had mattered to them, because my life had intersected with theirs in meaningful ways. My sister had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a series of fraudulent documents and stolen benefits. But the people in this room proved that a life can't be stolen or faked or forged. It can only be lived, one genuine interaction at a time. The last entry in the memory book was from my old college roommate, who had driven down from Flagstaff. "Colleen always said that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. She was right about that. Just like she was right about most things. I'm so glad she's still here to remind us." Walking out of the community center into the Arizona sunshine, I realized that Maria had given me something valuable without meaning. 2. She'd shown me exactly how much my life was worth, not in dollars stolen or benefits claimed, but in the faces of people who had been willing to spend their Saturday afternoon honoring my memory. The woman who had tried to kill me on paper had accidentally proven that I was very much alive. Agent Williams caught up with us in the parking lot. "Colleen, I know this has been overwhelming, but I wanted you to know that the evidence we collected today will make prosecution much easier. Your sister confessed to several details while she was being arrested." "What kind of details?" "She admitted to forging the death certificate and filing for the insurance claim. She also confirmed that your mother was aware of the scheme from the beginning. The boyfriend is trying to claim ignorance, but his social media posts make that difficult to believe. I thought about my mother sitting in the front row of my memorial service, playing the grieving parent while collecting Social Security benefits based on my fake death. The betrayal hurt more than I'd expected, even though I'd known about her involvement for weeks. "What happens next?" I asked. There will be arraignments, probably plea negotiations, eventually a trial if they don't take deals. The federal charges carry serious prison time, especially for your sister since she was the primary organizer. Your mother will probably get a lighter sentence if she cooperates. Prison time. My sister was going to prison because she'd decided that stealing my identity was easier than dealing with her gambling debts honestly. My mother was going to have a criminal record because she'd chosen money over her own daughter. But as painful as those realizations were, I also felt a strange sense of closure. For months, I'd been living in limbo, not legally dead, but not fully alive either. Today had changed that. Today, everyone knew the truth. Ashley drove me to the police station, where I spent the next 4 hours giving detailed statements to local police, federal agents, and Social Security investigators. They asked about everything, from the fake hospital visit to the social media evidence Ashley had found. I told them about the forged documents, the stolen benefits, the elaborate performance Maria had staged to trick me. By the time we finished, it was almost evening. The sun was setting over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me why I'd always loved living in Arizona despite the heat. "You hungry?" Ashley asked as we walked back to her car. "I know a great Mexican place that's open late." I realized I hadn't eaten anything all day. The stress of confronting my sister at my own memorial service had killed my appetite, but now I was starving. "Food sounds perfect," I said. "But first, can we drive past my old apartment? I want to see if my stuff is still there or if they've already rented it out." The apartment complex looked exactly the same, but there was a different car in my old parking spot and new curtains in the windows. My life there was gone, packed up and disposed of like I really had died. "It's okay," I said, though Ashley looked worried about my reaction. "It's just stuff. I'm still here, and that's what, matters." At the Mexican restaurant, we ordered way too much food and sat in a corner booth where we could talk without being overheard. The normalcy of it was almost shocking after months of living in crisis mode. "So, what now?" Ashley asked, dipping a chip in salsa. "I mean, obviously you're welcome to stay with me as long as you need to, but what do you want to do next?" It was a good question. Practically speaking, I needed to find a new job, a new apartment, rebuild my credit, and restore all the pieces of my identity that Maria had damaged. But on a deeper level, I needed to figure out who I was now that I'd survived something most people couldn't imagine. "I think I want to write about this," I said. "Not just for therapy, but to help other people who might be going through identity theft or family betrayal. When this first happened, I felt so alone, like I was the only person who'd ever been erased by someone they trusted." Ashley nodded. "There have to be other people dealing with similar situations. Maybe not as extreme as yours, but family fraud is probably more common than anyone wants to admit." "I also want to go back to insurance investigation," I said. "After living through fraud myself, I think I'd be even better at spotting it in other people's claims." We talked until the restaurant started closing, planning my resurrection not just legally, but personally. It felt good to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. When we got back to Ashley's apartment, there were 17 voicemails on my phone from reporters who had somehow gotten my number. News of my appearance at my own memorial service was spreading fast, especially on social media where people who had been at the community center were sharing their videos and photos. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them. I wasn't ready to be a public figure or a cautionary tale. Right now, I just wanted to be Colleen Garcia, a woman who had died on paper but lived in reality, who had been betrayed by family but supported by friends, who had lost everything material but gained something more valuable, the absolute certainty that she was exactly who she was supposed to be. The last thing I did before going to sleep on Ashley's couch was write in the memory book that David had abandoned. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote, Thank you all for proving that a life well lived can't be stolen, only interrupted. Today you gave me back more than my identity. You gave me back my faith in people. Love, Colleen Garcia. Very much alive. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more paperwork, more complications as the legal system slowly ground forward. But, tonight, I was just grateful to be breathing, to be real, to be surrounded by people who knew the difference between performance and truth. My sister had taught me that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when your blood relatives fail you. Sometimes it's the people who believe in your existence even when official documents say otherwise. Sometimes it's the people who come to your funeral and celebrate when you walk in alive. 3 weeks after my resurrection at the memorial service, I thought the worst was behind me. The arrests had been made, the federal investigation was moving forward, and I was slowly rebuilding my life from Ashley's couch. I'd even started getting calls from my old boss at Meridian Insurance about potentially returning to work once my legal status was fully restored. That naive optimism died on a Tuesday morning when Ashley burst through her apartment door, laptop in hand and panic written across her face. "Colleen, you need to see this," she said, practically throwing the computer at me. The screen showed a local news website with a headline that made my blood freeze. Memorial Service Hoax. Sister claims death was staged for attention. Below the headline was a photo of Maria in an orange jail jumpsuit, but she wasn't looking defeated or ashamed. She was smiling at the camera with the kind of confidence that made my stomach drop. I clicked on the article with shaking hands. The journalist had interviewed Maria from the county jail, where she was being held pending trial. According to the piece, Maria was now claiming that I had orchestrated my own fake death as an elaborate publicity stunt. "My sister has always been desperate for attention," Maria was quoted as saying. "She's jealous that I found love with David and that our mother and I grew closer after Dad died. This whole thing is just her way of making herself the center of everyone's universe again." The article went on to detail Maria's new version of events. According to her, I had approached her months ago with a plan to fake my death, collect the insurance money, and then come back from the dead as some kind of social media influencer. She claimed that the hospital visit was my idea, that I provided her with blank forms to forge, and that the whole memorial service confrontation was choreographed for maximum dramatic impact. "She's been planning this for months," Maria told the reporter. "The FBI thinks they're investigating fraud, but they're actually investigating performance art. My sister watched too many true crime documentaries and thought she could manipulate the system." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Maria was not only denying responsibility for the fraud, she was painting me as the mastermind behind an elaborate hoax designed to gain sympathy and attention. But the worst part came at the end of the article, where the journalist had apparently reached out to other family members for comment. They'd found our Aunt Elena, my father's sister who lived in Tucson, who told them, "Colleen was always a difficult child, very manipulative, very dramatic. It wouldn't surprise me if she came up with something like this just to cause trouble." For Maria, Aunt Elena had barely spoken to our family in years, but somehow her opinion was being presented as expert testimony on my character. The article made it sound like there was genuine doubt about who was the victim and who was the perpetrator. "This is insane," Ashley said, reading over my shoulder. "No one's going to believe this, right? I mean, you have evidence." I wasn't so sure. Maria's new story was clever in its simplicity. It explained away all the evidence against her by claiming I had provided it. It painted me as an attention-seeking manipulator while casting her as the innocent victim of my elaborate scheme. My phone started ringing almost immediately. The first call was from Agent Williams. "Colleen, I just saw the news article," she said without preamble. "I want you to know that this doesn't change anything about our investigation. We have solid evidence of fraud, including bank records and forged documents that your sister couldn't have created if you were complicit." But what if people believe her story? I asked. What if everyone thinks I made this whole thing up? The evidence doesn't lie, Agent Williams said firmly. Your sister is desperate, and desperate people say desperate things. This is just her attempt to muddy the waters before trial. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the morning watching my phone buzz with calls from reporters wanting my response to Maria's claims. I didn't answer any of them, but I couldn't stop myself from reading the comments on the news article online. Most people seemed skeptical of Maria's story, but enough believed it to make me sick to my stomach. Sounds like typical millennial attention-seeking behavior, one commenter wrote. Why else would someone go to their own funeral? She probably filmed the whole thing for TikTok. Another comment read, I've seen this girl's sister on TV, and she seems way more credible than this crazy woman who showed up at her own memorial service. Something doesn't add up. By noon, the story had spread to social media, where it took on a life of its own. Fake funeral started trending on Twitter, with people debating whether I was a victim of fraud or the perpetrator of an elaborate hoax. Someone had even created a poll asking users to vote on whether they believed Maria or me. I was losing. Ashley found me crying on her bathroom floor around 2 p.m, scrolling through increasingly cruel social media posts on my phone. You have to stop reading that stuff, she said, gently taking the phone from my hands. Those people don't know you. They don't know what really happened. But what if they're right? I sobbed. What if I am just an attention-seeking narcissist who somehow manipulated everyone into believing Maria was the bad guy? Are you serious right now? Ashley sat down on the bathroom floor next to me. Colleen, you've been sleeping on my couch for months because your sister stole your entire identity. You've been to more government offices than a congressional aide trying to prove you're alive. Does that sound like someone who staged their own death for attention? Logically, I knew she was right, but logic didn't stop the doubt from creeping in. Maria's story was so confident, so detailed, that part of me started wondering if there was some truth to it. Had I somehow contributed to this situation? Had my behavior after Dad's death pushed Maria toward desperate measures? The doubt was poison, and I could feel it spreading through every memory, every interaction, every moment of certainty I'd built over the past few months. That evening, things got worse. Ashley came home from work with news that made my stomach drop even further. People at my office are talking about this, she said carefully. Some of them saw the news story and they're asking questions about you staying here. What kind of questions? Whether you're really a victim or if you're running some kind of scam. My manager asked if I was sure I wasn't being manipulated by a con artist. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only was Maria's story spreading, it was starting to affect the people who had supported me. Ashley was facing scrutiny at work because she'd helped me, because she'd believed in me when no one else would. Maybe I should find somewhere else to stay, I said quietly. Absolutely not, Ashley said immediately. I don't care what people at work think. I know you, and I know what your sister did to you. You're not going anywhere. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she was having to defend me to people who should have been strangers to this whole situation. Maria's lies weren't just attacking me, they were attacking everyone who had shown me kindness. The next morning brought a new nightmare. I woke up to find my phone buzzing with notifications from every social media platform I'd ever used. Someone had found my old Facebook account and was sharing screenshots of posts I'd made years ago, taking them out of context to support Maria's narrative. A post I'd made after my father's funeral about feeling lost and invisible had been twisted into evidence that I was an attention seeker who felt neglected by my family. A photo of me alone at a restaurant, captioned, "Dinner for one again," was being used to prove that I was lonely and desperate for connection. Every normal human moment of sadness or frustration was being weaponized against me by people who had never met me. but felt qualified to judge my entire character based on social media forensics. But the worst discovery came when Ashley showed me what she'd found on David's Instagram account. He had apparently been granted access to social media while in jail and had posted a long statement supporting Maria's version of events. "I never wanted to get involved in this family drama," David wrote, "but I can't stay silent while an innocent woman is being painted as a criminal. Maria is the kindest, most honest person I've ever known. She would never hurt anyone, especially not her own sister. If you want to know who the real villain is here, look at who benefited from all this chaos. Look at who's getting all the attention and sympathy." The post had hundreds of likes and comments supporting Maria and David, calling me a sociopath and a master manipulator. People were sharing it widely, adding their own commentary about how I'd fooled everyone, including law enforcement. "He's in jail for fraud," Ashley pointed out. "Why would anyone believe what he says?" But people did believe him, or at least enough of them to keep the doubt alive. Maria's story was gaining traction because it was simpler than the truth. It was easier to believe that one person had orchestrated an elaborate hoax than to accept that a sister could systematically destroy her sibling's life for money. By the end of the week, I felt like I was losing my mind. Every day brought new evidence that Maria's supporters had found to prove I was lying. Old coworkers were being contacted by amateur internet detectives asking about my behavior and personality. High school classmates were being asked to comment on whether I'd always been attention-seeking. The worst part was that some of them were actually responding. People I hadn't spoken to in years were giving interviews to bloggers and YouTubers, sharing stories about how I'd been weird or dramatic in high school. Never mind that everyone is weird and dramatic in high school. These anecdotes were being presented as evidence of my fundamentally deceptive character. Agent Williams called me on Friday with an update that should have been good news, but somehow felt like another blow. "Your sister's attorney has reached out about a plea deal," she said. "They're offering to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a reduced sentence." "That's good, right? It means she's admitting guilt." "It should be good," Agent Williams said carefully. "But there's a condition. She wants you to sign a statement saying that you were a willing participant in the initial planning stages, even if you didn't intend for things to go as far as they did." I almost dropped the phone. She wants me to admit I helped plan my own fake death? It's a common negotiation tactic. Her attorney is trying to create reasonable doubt about your complete innocence, which could reduce her sentence and civil liability. They're banking on the media coverage making you desperate, enough to accept any resolution. And if I don't sign it? Then we go to trial, where her attorney will argue that you're the real mastermind and she's just a naive accomplice who got in over her head. I hung up feeling more defeated than I had since this whole nightmare began. Maria wasn't just trying to avoid responsibility for what she'd done, she was trying to drag me down with her. Even if she went to prison, she wanted to make sure my reputation was destroyed in the process. That weekend, Ashley and I drove out to Sedona, hoping that getting away from Phoenix would give me some perspective and peace. The red rocks and desert landscape had always been a source of comfort for me, a reminder that some things were too big and ancient to be affected by human drama. We hiked one of the easier trails, avoiding the tourist crowds and finding a quiet spot where we could sit and watch the sunset paint the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. "I keep thinking about what my dad would say if he could see this," I said, throwing pebbles at a small cactus. He always told me that the truth would come out eventually, that honest people didn't need to worry about lies because lies couldn't survive in the light. "Maybe he was right," Ashley said. "Maybe this is just Maria's lies getting desperate and loud before they finally collapse. Or maybe he was wrong. Maybe lies can survive just fine if they're more interesting than the truth." We sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows grow longer as the sun sank toward the horizon. In the distance, other hikers were heading back to their cars, their voices carrying across the desert air. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that someone sitting 50 feet away was having her entire existence questioned by strangers on the internet. "You know what I realized? Today," I said eventually, "even if Maria goes to prison, even if the FBI proves that every document was forged and every benefit was stolen, there will always be people who think I was involved. There will always be doubt." Ashley was quiet for a long moment. "Does that change anything?" "I don't know. Maybe it changes everything." Driving back to Phoenix that evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to stop running from Maria's lies and start running towards something else. I couldn't control what people believed about me, but I could control what I did next. The next morning, I called Agent Williams and told her I wouldn't be signing any statement admitting complicity in Maria's scheme. I also told her I wanted to give interviews to any reporter who asked, not to defend myself, but to tell the complete truth about what family fraud looked like from the inside. "Are you sure about this?" Agent Williams asked. "Media attention can be unpredictable, and it might make the trial more complicated." "I'm sure. If people are going to judge me anyway, they might as well judge me based on my actual words instead of Maria's lies." I spent the rest of the week preparing for interviews, working with Ashley to organize all the evidence I'd collected over the months. Bank statements, forged documents, screenshots of social media posts, audio recordings of conversations with government offices trying to prove I was alive. The paper trail of being systematically erased by someone who was supposed to love me. But I also prepared to talk about the emotional reality of family betrayal, the way it felt to discover that your sister valued money more than your relationship, the specific loneliness of being legally dead while physically alive. The first interview was with a local reporter who had covered the original memorial service story. She met me at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, a neutral location where I could speak freely without worrying about being ambushed by Maria's supporters. "Why do you think your sister is now claiming this was all your idea?" the reporter asked, after I'd walked her through the timeline of events. "Because she's desperate," I said. "She got caught committing serious federal crimes, and she's trying to create doubt about who the real victim is. It's easier to paint me as a master manipulator than to admit she systematically stole my identity for money. But some people find it hard to believe that someone would show up to their own memorial service if they weren't seeking attention." I'd been prepared for this question. "Have you ever had your identity stolen?" The reporter shook her head. "Then you might not understand how desperate you become to prove you exist. I'd been legally dead for months. My bank accounts were frozen. My credit was destroyed. My job was gone. The memorial service wasn't about attention. It was about truth. It was about standing in front of people who knew me and saying, 'I'm still here.'" The interview ran the next day with the headline, "Identity Theft Victim Speaks Out." This wasn't about attention, it was about survival. The response was more positive than I'd expected, with most comments supporting my version of events. But Maria's supporters weren't giving up easily. Within hours, someone had posted a video response claiming to analyze my body language during the interview and pointing out moments where I supposedly showed signs of deception. Another blogger wrote a detailed post arguing that my story was too convenient, too perfectly crafted to be true. But something had shifted inside me. Instead of feeling defeated by these attacks, I felt oddly liberated. Maria had done her worst, thrown every accusation she could think of, tried to turn my own survival into evidence against me. And I was still here. The breaking point came 2 weeks later when I received a call from my old landlord, Mr. Peterson. He'd been contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to interview him about my elaborate hoax for a true crime series. "I told him he was crazy," Mr. Peterson said. "You were the best tenant I ever had. Quiet, responsible, always paid rent on time. If you were capable of planning something this complicated, you would have been running Fortune 500 companies, not processing insurance claims." That conversation led to another realization. The people who actually knew me, who had interacted with me regularly over months or years, weren't buying Maria's story. It was only strangers, people who had learned about me through news articles and social media posts, who found her version believable. My real life, the one I'd lived quietly and honestly for 32 years, was my best defense against Maria's lies. I didn't need to convince everyone on the internet that I was telling the truth. I just needed to convince the people who mattered, the judge, the jury, and ultimately myself. That night, I made a list of everyone who had supported me throughout this ordeal. Ashley, who had opened her home to me when I had nowhere else to go. Agent Williams, who had believed my story from the beginning and worked tirelessly to build a case against Maria. My old co-workers at Meridian Insurance, who had written character references for me. The people at my memorial service who had hugged me and cried with relief when I walked through those doors. These weren't people who could be easily fooled or manipulated. They were intelligent adults who had looked at the evidence and made informed decisions about who to trust. Maria could spin her lies to reporters and social media followers, but she couldn't undo the relationships I'd built over decades of honest living. She couldn't erase the character witnesses who had seen me at my worst moments and still believed in my integrity. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the victim of an elaborate fraud, not the subject of a true crime story. Just Colleen Garcia, a woman who had survived something terrible and was ready to move forward. The turning point came when I least expected it. I was grocery shopping at the Safeway near Ashley's apartment when I ran into Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who had witnessed Maria and David moving out of their apartment complex. "Mija," she said, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "I saw you on the news. That sister of yours, she's telling lies about you." "I know, Mrs. Rodriguez. It's been difficult." She shook her head vigorously. "No, you don't understand. I have video." My heart stopped. Video of what? My grandson installed a security camera by my front door after there were some break-ins. It records everything that happens in the hallway and the parking lot. I have video of your sister and her boyfriend loading boxes into a truck at 5 in the morning, just like I told you. Mrs. Rodriguez explained that she'd kept the video footage because she thought it might be useful if there were questions about damages to the apartment complex. She'd seen news coverage of Maria's arrest and had been waiting for someone to ask her about what she'd witnessed. "The video has a timestamp," she continued. "It shows them moving out the morning after you went to the hospital looking for your mother. If she says you planned this together, why would she be sneaking away in the middle of the night?" I wanted to kiss this sweet old woman who had unknowingly provided the final piece of evidence that would demolish Maria's story. The video footage proved that Maria had fled immediately after filing the fake death certificate, behavior that made no sense if I had been her willing accomplice. Agent Williams was thrilled when I called her with the news. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "Your sister's attorney has been arguing that you had time to coordinate your stories, but this video proves she was running from something, not running to meet you." With Mrs. Rodriguez's video in hand, I finally felt ready to stop playing defense and start playing offense. Maria had spent weeks trying to destroy my credibility, but she'd forgotten that lies require perfect consistency to survive. One piece of contradictory evidence could bring down her entire alternate narrative. That evening, I sat down at Ashley's kitchen table and wrote out everything I wanted people to know about family fraud, about the specific cruelty of being betrayed by someone you trust completely, not for reporters or social media, but for myself, for the closure of putting the truth into words that couldn't be twisted or misinterpreted. "She didn't just steal my money," I wrote. "She stole my place in the world, my connections to other people, my right to exist in the eyes of the law. She made me disappear so completely that I started to doubt my own reality." That's not something you do to someone you love, even if you're desperate. That's something you do to someone you see as disposable. Maria had made a fundamental miscalculation when she decided to destroy my reputation along with my identity. She'd assumed that I would be too broken by her betrayal to fight back effectively. She hadn't counted on the fact that surviving her original fraud had made me stronger, not weaker. She definitely hadn't counted on Mrs. Rodriguez and her grandson's security camera. As I finished writing, I realized that Maria had accidentally given me something valuable. She'd forced me to examine my own life from every angle, to defend. Not just my actions, but my character, my relationships, my entire way of being in the world. Under that kind of scrutiny, I'd discovered that I liked who I was. I wasn't perfect, wasn't always easy to get along with, wasn't the most social or charming person in any room, but I was honest, reliable, and loyal to the people who mattered to me. Maria could call me attention-seeking, manipulative, or desperate. She could paint me as a villain in her twisted version of events, but she couldn't change the fundamental fact that I had lived my life with integrity while she had chosen deception and theft. The truth wasn't just going to come out eventually, as my father had promised. The truth was already here, had been here all along, waiting for people to choose whether they wanted to see it. I was done being afraid of Maria's lies. Tomorrow, I would start building something new from the ruins of everything she'd tried to destroy. Mrs. Rodriguez's security footage changed everything, but I wasn't content to simply hand over evidence and wait for the legal system to sort things out. Maria had spent weeks crafting a public narrative that painted me as the villain in my own story, and I realized that justice in the courtroom wasn't enough. I needed to reclaim control of the narrative itself. The morning after Mrs. Rodriguez showed me the video, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of staying quiet and letting the lawyers handle everything, I was going to systematically dismantle Maria's lies using the same tools she'd used to spread them: social media, interviews, and public documentation. Ashley looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I explained my plan over coffee. "You want to start a social media campaign? Colleen, you hate social media. You barely posted anything before all this happened." "That's exactly why it will work," I said, pulling up Maria's Instagram account on my phone. "Look at this. Every post is carefully curated, perfectly staged, designed to create an image. She's been performing her entire life online, but I've been living mine offline. That authenticity is going to be my weapon." I spent the next 3 days studying everything Maria had posted over the past year, looking for inconsistencies and lies that I could expose. What I found was even more damaging than I'd expected. Maria had been documenting her gambling problem and financial struggles in real time, posting about poker games and casino trips even while claiming to be a grieving sister concerned about funeral expenses. More importantly, I found posts that directly contradicted her new story about me being the mastermind. In one post from 2 months before my supposed death, Maria had written, "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just disappear and start over somewhere else. Leave all the debt and drama behind and become someone completely new." In another post, she'd shared an article about life insurance fraud with the caption, "Crazy how people think they can get away with this stuff. Don't they know there are investigators whose job it is to catch liars?" The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Maria had essentially confessed her intentions and methods in advance, thinking she was being clever by hiding her plans in plain sight. But I didn't want to just point out Maria's contradictions. I wanted to tell a different story entirely, one that showed what family fraud actually looked like from the victim's perspective. So I created a new Instagram account called Legally, Dead, Actually Alive, and started posting about my experience in real time. My first post was a photo of the stack of paperwork required to prove you're alive when the government thinks you're dead. The caption read, "This is what it looks like to rebuild your existence from scratch. 47 forms, 23 office visits, 12 different agencies, and 4 months of sleeping on a friend's couch. But sure, let's pretend I staged my own death for attention." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, people were sharing their own stories of identity theft and family betrayal in the comments. A woman from Texas described how her brother had stolen her Social Security number to open credit cards. A man from Florida told me about his ex-wife who had tried to claim his life insurance by falsely reporting him dead after their divorce. I realized I'd accidentally tapped into something much bigger than my own situation. Family fraud was apparently common enough that dozens of people had similar experiences, but it was rarely discussed because victims felt ashamed and isolated. My second post was a video of me calling the Social Security Administration to check on my status. I recorded the entire conversation, including the 20-minute hold time and the confused representative who had to escalate my case to 3 different supervisors before anyone could figure out how to handle a dead person who was calling to complain about being dead. "This is not a prank call," I said to the camera after hanging up. "This is my life. This is what Maria reduced me to, a woman arguing with bureaucrats about whether she exists." The video went viral overnight, shared by people who found it. Both heartbreaking and absurd. News outlets picked it up, using it as an example of how broken the identity verification system was. Suddenly, I wasn't just the woman who'd appeared at her own memorial service. I was becoming the face of identity theft recovery. But my real strategic stroke came when I decided to attend Maria's arraignment hearing. Her attorney had been arguing in the media that I was avoiding court proceedings because I was afraid my story wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. So I showed up, sat in the front row, and live-tweeted the entire proceeding. The courthouse was packed with reporters and curiosity seekers, many of whom had been following my social media accounts. When Maria was brought in wearing her orange jumpsuit, she looked directly at me and smiled. It wasn't a warm, sisterly smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they still had the upper hand. Her attorney, a sharp-dressed man who specialized in white-collar defense cases, tried to argue that the charges should be reduced because of the complex family dynamics involved in the case. He suggested that I had been a willing participant in the early stages of the scheme, even if I'd later changed my mind. "Your Honor," he said, "the so-called victim in this case has been conducting a very public media campaign designed to generate sympathy and potentially profit from this situation. We question whether someone who's truly innocent would be so focused on public relations instead of private healing." I tweeted his exact words as he said them, adding my own commentary. Apparently, seeking justice publicly means you're not really a victim. Good to know for future reference. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Martinez, wasn't having any of it. She presented Mrs. Rodriguez's security footage right there in open court, showing Maria and David loading boxes into a truck at 5 a.m. the morning after my supposed death. If Ms. Garcia was coordinating with her sister, Prosecutor Martinez said, why was she fleeing in the middle of the night like a criminal? Why didn't she contact her supposed co-conspirator to discuss their next steps? Maria's attorney tried to argue that the video didn't prove anything, that Maria might have been moving for unrelated reasons. But when the prosecutor played audio from one of my early police reports, where I'd described going to Maria's apartment and finding it empty with no forwarding information, the timeline became undeniable. I live-tweeted every moment of the hearing, from Maria's facial expressions to her attorney's increasingly desperate arguments. My followers were getting a real-time education in how family fraud cases actually worked, and the response was overwhelmingly supportive. But the real turning point came when the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. This wasn't typical for an arraignment, but given the unusual circumstances and media attention, she was allowing it. I stood up, looked directly at Maria, and spoke for 3 minutes about what it felt like to be erased by someone you love. Your Honor, my sister didn't just steal my money or my identity, I said. She stole my place in the world. She made me doubt my own existence, question my own memories, wonder if I was somehow responsible for my own destruction. That's not something you do to someone you're conspiring with. That's something you do to someone you've stopped seeing as human. Maria's smile finally faltered. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she looked genuinely uncomfortable, maybe even ashamed. The judge denied her attorney's request for reduced charges and set a trial date for 3 months. Later, as Maria was led away, she looked back at me one more time, but the confidence was gone from her eyes. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me asking for comments. Instead of giving them sound bites, I handed out cards with my Instagram handle and told them to follow my account for real-time updates on identity theft recovery. If you want to understand this story, I said to the cameras, don't just read the headlines. Look at the evidence. Look at the documentation. Look at what it actually takes to prove you're alive when someone has declared you dead. That evening, my Instagram account gained 10,000 new followers. More importantly, I started getting messages from other identity theft victims asking for advice and support. I realized I'd accidentally created something valuable, a community of people who understood what it felt like to have your existence questioned by bureaucratic systems. Over the next few weeks, I developed my strategy further. Instead of just defending myself against Maria's lies, I started proactively sharing information about how identity theft happens, how to prevent it, and how to recover from it. I posted photos of every document I'd had to file, every office I'd had to visit, every conversation I'd had to have to slowly rebuild my legal existence. I also started investigating Maria's story more thoroughly, using the same research skills I'd developed as an insurance claims processor. I reached out to people who had known her over the past few years, asking about her behavior, her financial situation, and her relationship with David. What I discovered was a pattern of escalating desperation and poor decision-making that had been building long before she decided to fake my death. Maria had been borrowing money from friends and family members for months, always promising to pay it back but never following through. She'd been lying about having a job at the medical clinic for weeks before she actually quit, telling people she was getting promoted when she was actually being investigated for stealing medical supplies. Most damaging of all, I found social media posts from David's friends talking about his gambling debts and connections to loan sharks. One friend had posted a warning about David owing money to the wrong people and needing to disappear for a while to avoid consequences. I compiled all of this information into a comprehensive timeline that I posted across multiple social media platforms. It painted a clear picture of two people who had gotten in over their heads financially and decided to solve their problems by literally erasing me from existence. The timeline went viral, shared by true crime enthusiasts and legal commentators who were fascinated by the documentation and evidence I'd gathered. More importantly, it reached the people who had been following Maria's story and wondering if there might be some truth to her claims about my involvement. But my most effective strategy was also the simplest. I just kept being myself publicly. While Maria's social media presence had always been carefully curated and artificially perfect, I shared the messy, complicated reality of rebuilding a life after betrayal. I posted photos of me crying in government offices, screenshots of confusing legal documents, videos of me explaining complicated insurance terminology to followers who were dealing with their own fraud cases. I shared my failures and frustrations along with my victories, creating a stark contrast to Maria's polished lies. The authenticity resonated with people in a way that surprised me. Comments poured in from people saying they could tell I was telling the truth because I wasn't trying to make myself look perfect or heroic. I was just sharing what was actually happening day by day, form by form, phone call by phone call. 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Maria's attorney reached out to me directly. He wanted to discuss a plea agreement that would involve Maria admitting to the fraud charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. The catch was that she still wanted me to sign a statement acknowledging that I had been initially supportive of the idea to fake my death, even if I hadn't understood the full implications. I posted a photo of the proposed plea agreement on Instagram with the caption, "Even when she's admitting guilt, my sister still wants to drag me down with her." This is what manipulation looks like when it's desperate. The response from my followers was swift and decisive. Hundreds of comments urged me not to sign anything that suggested I had been complicit in my own identity theft. Legal experts who followed my account explained why the language in the plea agreement was problematic and how it could affect my civil case against Maria for damages. I declined the plea offer publicly, posting a video where I explained my reasoning, directly to the camera. I've spent months rebuilding my life and my reputation after my sister tried to destroy both, I said. I'm not going to compromise either one now just to make her punishment slightly more comfortable. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. The video was shared thousands of times with people praising my refusal to accept a false narrative just to end the legal proceedings more quickly. Maria's attorney tried one more strategic move before trial. He released a statement claiming that my social media campaign proved I was profiting from the situation and therefore couldn't be considered a true victim. He pointed to the donations some followers had sent me and the speaking opportunities I'd received as evidence that I had financially benefited from Maria's crimes. I responded with complete transparency, posting screenshots of my bank account showing exactly how much money I'd received from donations, less than $3,000, barely enough to cover the legal fees I'd incurred, and proof that I'd donated most of the speaking fees to identity theft prevention organizations. If anyone thinks I came out ahead financially from having my sister steal my identity and fake my death, I wrote, I invite them to look at my credit report, my employment history, and my housing situation. This isn't profit, this is survival. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix, with media attention that surprised everyone involved. The courtroom was packed with reporters, true crime enthusiasts, and people who had been following my story on social media. I'd built an audience that was invested in seeing justice done, and their presence created pressure that Maria's attorney clearly hadn't anticipated. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I was in control of my own narrative. I'd spent months being reactive, responding to Maria's lies and schemes, trying to prove my innocence to skeptical bureaucrats and hostile strangers. But now I was driving the conversation. I'd built a platform that allowed me to speak directly to people without having my words filtered through reporters or twisted by Maria's attorney. I'd gathered evidence that was more comprehensive than anything the prosecutors had compiled. I'd created a community of supporters who understood the real dynamics of family fraud because I'd educated them about it in real time. Maria had tried to erase me from existence, but instead she'd forced me to become more visible than I'd ever been in my life. She'd intended to reduce me to a footnote in her story of financial desperation, but I'd turned myself into the author of my own narrative about survival and justice. As I sat in the courtroom waiting for the trial to begin, I realized that regardless of the verdict, I'd already won the most important battle. I'd refused to let Maria define who I was or what my story meant. I'd taken control of my own voice and used it to help other people understand what family betrayal really looked like. Maria had underestimated my willingness to fight back, but more importantly, she'd underestimated my capacity to turn trauma into purpose, isolation into community, and lies into crystal clear truth. The woman who had tried to kill me on paper was about to learn what resurrection really looked like. Part 5. Resolution and New Equilibrium. The trial lasted 4 days, and by the end of it, Maria's carefully constructed alternative reality had crumbled completely. Her attorney's strategy of painting me as the mastermind fell apart when faced with the mountain of evidence I'd helped compile. The testimony of witnesses like Mrs. Rodriguez, and most damaging of all, Maria's own social media history. The prosecution played audio recordings of phone calls Maria had made from jail to David, conversations where she openly discussed how to spin the story and make me look like a co-conspirator. In one particularly damning recording, she told David, "Just keep saying Colleen planned it all. Even if they don't believe it completely, it'll make people doubt her credibility." When Maria took the stand in her own defense, she stuck to her story that I had approached her with the plan to fake my death. But under cross-examination, she couldn't explain why she'd fled immediately after filing the death certificate, why she'd spent months in Las Vegas using stolen benefits money, or why she'd never attempted to contact me if we were supposedly working together. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: identity theft, fraud, filing false federal documents, and conspiracy. David was convicted on related charges, though his sentence would be lighter, since he'd been more of an accomplice than a leader. My mother received the most lenient sentence, 18 months probation and community service, after her attorney successfully argued that she'd been manipulated by Maria and hadn't understood the full scope of the fraud. I wasn't sure I believed that, but I was ready to let the courts handle the justice part while I focused on rebuilding. Maria was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for all the money she'd stolen. The Orisiao judge made it clear that the severity of the sentence reflected not just the financial crimes, but the psychological damage of systematically erasing a family member's existence. Ms. Garcia, the judge said, looking directly at Maria, you didn't just steal money. You attempted to steal your sister's place in the world, her relationships, her very identity. This court has rarely seen such a calculated and cruel betrayal of family trust. Maria showed no emotion during the sentencing, but I caught her looking at me one last time as the bailiff led her away. There was still no apology in her eyes, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just a kind of cold resentment that I'd refused to let her get away with it. After the trial, reporters surrounded me outside the courthouse, asking how I felt about the verdict and what I planned to do next. Instead of giving them the emotional sound bites they wanted, I used the moment to talk about the broader issue of family fraud and identity theft. Justice was served today, I said to the cameras, but there are thousands of people dealing with similar situations who don't have the resources or support system I was lucky enough to have. We need better systems for identity verification, faster processes for fraud recovery, and more awareness that family members are often the perpetrators of these crimes. The interview clips were picked up by national news outlets, and within a week I was getting calls from victim advocacy organizations asking me to speak at conferences and training seminars. My Instagram account, which had started as a way to defend myself against Maria's lies, had evolved into a resource for identity theft victims across the country. 6 months after the trial, I was offered a job with the Federal Trade Commission's Identity Theft Division, working on policy development and victim services. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been doing informally through social media, but with the resources and authority to make real systemic changes. I took the job and moved to Washington, D.C., finally leaving Ashley's couch after almost a year of displacement. She threw me a going-away party that was really more like a celebration of survival, attended by all the people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. You know what's funny? Ashley said during her toast. Maria thought she was erasing you, but she actually helped you find your true calling. You're going to help more people because of what she did to you than you ever would have as an insurance claims processor. She was right. The work I was doing now felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned during my months of being legally dead. I understood the bureaucratic maze from the inside, knew exactly where the system failed victims, and had first-hand experience with the emotional toll of identity theft. My first major project was developing new protocols for death certificate verification, designed to prevent exactly the kind of fraud Maria had committed. We created multiple checkpoints that required independent verification before benefits could be claimed, making it much harder for someone to fake a family member's death. I also worked on a program to fast-track identity restoration for fraud victims, cutting the typical recovery time from months to weeks. Every form I simplified, every process I streamlined, was informed by my own experience of trying to prove I existed when the government said I didn't. The most rewarding part of the job was working directly with victims, helping them navigate the same maze I'd struggled through. I could look someone in the eye and say, I know exactly what you're going through, and mean it literally. One case that particularly stayed with me involved a woman whose daughter had stolen her identity to take out student loans. The mother had discovered the fraud when she tried to refinance her house and learned she apparently owed $200,000 in educational debt for degrees she'd never pursued. I keep thinking I must have done something wrong as a parent, the woman told me during our consultation. How does someone you raised turn into someone who would do this to you? I understood that question intimately. I'd asked myself the same thing about Maria countless times, wondering if there were signs I'd missed, moments where I could have intervened before her desperation turned into betrayal. You didn't cause this, I told her. People make their own choices, especially adults. Your daughter chose to solve her problems by stealing from you instead of asking for help or finding legal alternatives. That's on her, not on you. It was advice I'd had to learn to apply to my own situation. Maria's gambling addiction, her financial problems, her relationship with David, none of that was my responsibility. I couldn't have prevented her crimes by being a different kind of sister, because her choice to commit fraud wasn't really about me at all. 2 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter from Maria in prison. She'd apparently been required to participate in a victim impact program as part of her sentence, and part of that involved writing letters to the people she'd harmed. The letter was 3 pages long, typed on prison stationery, and it was the first time Maria had ever acknowledged what she'd actually done to me. She wrote about the gambling debts that had driven her to desperation, the way David had encouraged her worst impulses, and the gradual process by which she'd convinced herself that stealing my identity was justified. I told myself you were stronger than me, she wrote. I thought you could handle losing everything better than I could handle owing money to dangerous people. I turned you into a character in my own drama instead of remembering that you were my sister. The letter included an apology, but it felt hollow somehow, like something written to fulfill a program requirement rather than express genuine remorse. Maria acknowledged what she'd done, but she didn't seem to truly understand the impact it had on me. Still, I was glad she'd written it. Not because it changed anything about our relationship, which was permanently severed, but because it confirmed that my version of events had always been the truth. Maria's own words proved that she'd acted deliberately and selfishly, not as part of some elaborate scheme I'd masterminded. I never wrote back. There was nothing left to say to her, no relationship to repair or forgiveness to extend. Maria had made her choices, and now we were both living with the consequences. My mother reached out occasionally, usually around holidays, with awkward phone calls where she tried to pretend our family hadn't imploded. She'd served her probation and was living quietly in a retirement community outside Phoenix, supported by Social Security benefits she was actually entitled to. I kept our conversations brief and superficial. I couldn't pretend that her participation in Maria's scheme hadn't happened, but I also couldn't summon the energy to relitigate it endlessly. She was getting older, had health problems, and seemed genuinely regretful about her choices. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said during one of our calls. I just want you to know that I think about what we did to you every day. It wasn't enough to rebuild a relationship, but it was enough to let me stop carrying anger about her betrayal. I'd learned that forgiveness wasn't something you did for other people anyway. It was something you did for yourself, to stop letting their choices control your emotional state. 3 years after Maria's conviction, I was promoted to Deputy Director of the FTC's Identity Theft Division. My work had contributed to new federal legislation that strengthened penalties for family fraud and improved support services for victims. I'd also become a sought-after speaker on the topic, traveling around the country to train law enforcement officers, social workers, and victim advocates about the unique dynamics of crimes committed by family members. During one of these speaking engagements at a conference in Denver, I met someone who would become important in my new life. Dr. Sarah Chen was a forensic psychologist who specialized in family trauma, and she approached me after my presentation to discuss some of her research. "I've been studying cases like yours for years," she said over coffee. "The psychological impact of being betrayed by a family member is distinct from other kinds of victimization. There's a specific kind of healing that has to happen." We talked for hours about the intersection of our work, and I found myself opening up about aspects of my experience that I'd never discussed publicly. Sarah understood the complexity of grieving someone who was still alive, of missing a relationship that had turned out to be built on lies. We began collaborating on research projects and policy papers, and eventually our professional partnership evolved into something personal. Sarah became the first person I'd allowed myself to be truly vulnerable with since Maria's betrayal. The first person I trusted enough to share not just my story, but my ongoing fears and insecurities. "You know what strikes me about your case?" Sarah said one evening as we walked along the Potomac River. "You didn't just survive what your sister did to you. You transformed it into something that helps other people. That takes a kind of strength that most people don't have." I'd never thought of it that way. In my mind, I'd simply done what was necessary to rebuild my life and seek justice. But Sarah helped me see that choosing to turn trauma into purpose was actually a form of resilience that deserved recognition. 5 years after appearing at my own memorial service, I published a book about family fraud and identity theft recovery. Legally Dead, Actually Alive became a bestseller, not because people were drawn to the sensational aspects of my story, but because it provided practical guidance for victims and their families. The book tour gave me opportunities to meet readers who had been through similar experiences, and their stories reinforced my belief that family betrayal was far more common than most people wanted to acknowledge. Every city I visited, someone would approach me afterward to share their own story of being victimized by a relative. "Your book saved my sanity," one woman told me after an event in Chicago. "My brother stole my identity, and I kept thinking, I must have done something to deserve it." Reading about your experience helped me understand that this was about his choices, not my failures. That conversation, repeated dozens of times in different cities, reminded me why I'd chosen to make my story public in the first place. Maria's betrayal had isolated me and made me question my own judgment, but sharing what I'd learned had connected me to a community of survivors who understood that particular kind of pain. On the 5th anniversary of my legal resurrection, I received a call from Agent Williams, who had stayed in touch over the years. She was retiring from the FBI and wanted to let me know that my case had become a training example used in their white-collar crime division. "New agents study your case to understand how identity theft investigations should be conducted," she told me. "But more importantly, they learn about the importance of believing victims even when their stories seem impossible." That conversation made me think about how much had changed since the morning I'd woken up to find my sister stealing my existence. I'd gone from being a quiet insurance claims processor who avoided attention to being a public advocate whose work influenced federal policy. Maria had intended to erase me, but instead she'd forced me to become more visible than I'd ever imagined possible. She'd tried to reduce me to a footnote in her story of desperation, but I'd turned my experience into the foundation for a career dedicated to helping other people reclaim their stolen identities. The woman who had declared me dead had accidentally helped me find my life's work. Looking back now, I can see that Maria's betrayal was both the worst thing that ever happened to me and the catalyst for everything good that came after. She'd shown me how strong I was when everything was taken away, how resourceful I could be when cornered, how powerful my voice could become when I stopped trying to stay quiet and invisible. I'd learned that identity isn't just a collection of documents and account numbers that can be stolen or forged. It's the sum of your choices, your relationships, your impact on other people's lives. Maria could steal my Social Security benefits and life insurance money, but she couldn't steal the person I'd chosen to become in response to her betrayal. The sister who thought she could erase me had actually helped me discover who I really was. And for that unexpected gift, I was almost grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.